Welcome. I'm Elizabeth Castelli. I'm the acting director of the Barnard Center for Research on Women, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the 37th annual Scholar and Feminist Conference on the theme of vulnerability, the human, and the humanities. The Scholar and Feminist Conference is, as you may know, the Center's annual conference, which began in 1974 with a commitment to building and sustaining conversations between feminist academics and feminist activisms. In establishing and nurturing these conversations, we seek to trouble the binary between academics and activisms, recognizing that academic work is in itself often a form of activism, while activists are often producers of new forms of knowledge. The collaborations that we cultivate at the Barnard Center for Research on Women over the last decades have advanced both intellectual frameworks and practical organizing models that promote gender justice and feminist social change. And we're very pleased to welcome you today to this ongoing generative process of collaboration. This year's theme is vulnerability, the human, and the humanities. And it builds in some respects on last year's conference, which was called Movements, Politics, Performance, and Disability. We're interested this year in reflecting on the simple fact of vulnerability, that the fact that we are all, as embodied and social beings, also vulnerable beings. By recognizing vulnerability and interdependency as shared elements of existence and relationship, we are then invited to think anew about the structures, institutions, and communities that we create and inhabit, and to consider specifically how they can be transformed once vulnerability and interdependency are put at the center of our analysis. For the last decade or so, the language of vulnerability and precarity, and I'm using these terms roughly interchangeably, although I realize that they have different histories and genealogies and discursive fields. The language of vulnerability and precarity has offered a theoretical idiom for describing economic and political relationships under late capitalism. It has also provided a framework for sustained ethical reflection and the practice of critique, returning, in other words, to questions of the human and what disciplinary insights deriving from the humanities might offer us, even as we recognize that the boundaries of the human are always conceptually porous and unstable, bleeding into other categories that have traditionally perhaps been cast in simple opposition to the human, the animal, the technological, and the divine. Here is not the place to engage in a full-bodied genealogy of these terms of vulnerability and precarity, but it may be worth noticing that they possess a particular salience at our particular political moment, both domestically and internationally. A few months after we settled on vulnerability as the theme for this year's conference, the Occupy Wall Street movement was born. Among other things, this movement created a horizontal, non-centralized organizing framework that began by focusing attention on economic vulnerability and its cascading effects upon individuals and communities, opening up a much bigger conversation about the apparent self-evidencies of economic and social assumptions of our society. And all over the world, activists and dissenters have used vulnerability and precariousness as effective tools to leverage popular resistance against entrenched political systems, mobilizing some older forms of political activism, civil disobedience, hunger strikes, among others, alongside relatively newly articulated theoretical framings that make political meaning out of the experience of vulnerability. For feminist academic work and activism, the theoretical idiom of vulnerability and precarity may offer some critical ballast against recent alliances between a particular style of feminist advocacy, that, for example, that celebrates women's ascendancy into positions of power, and well-established social, political, and economic hierarchies. So we hope that the conference today will provide an opportunity for all of us to reflect upon both the social and existential facts of vulnerability on the one hand, and the potential for vulnerability and what the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas called the precariousness of the other, to inspire new ethical imaginations and strategies for organizing on the other.